We've not received much when it comes to official information on Divinity's classes, builds, or races yet, but we can still speculate a bit, use what we know from the Divinity franchise as a whole, of course, and also take a deeper look at the Divinity trailer, as during the Reddit AMA back in January of this year, Stranger of Anvil asked this: "What are the playable races and classes?" To which Greg from Larian responded by saying, "We aren't ready to talk about that quite yet, but if you rewatch the trailer, you should get some hints on the races." So let's start off with some race speculation here and start planning ahead already, because this is what I love to do with Larian games, and then we'll get into the class and or build discussion. In the Divinity cinematic announcement trailer, we got to see a bunch of villagers attending some sort of ritualistic event, and you can spot several different races in attendance. We of course have dwarves, humans, elves, and lizards, and I'd say those 4 races in particular are the ones that you can pretty much almost guarantee will be options in Divinity. All 4 of these were options in Larian's Divinity Original Sin 2, and all 4 of these races fall into that more common civilized race type category in Rivellon lore. Humans are Rivellon's dominant race, and they tend to be adaptable but also quite superstitious and expansionist. They're also no stranger to civil war. When going off of Original Sin 2, and this is by no means a guarantee to be the same in Divinity, but just to get an idea, humans get bonuses to crit chance and bartering, meaning cheaper prices when they buy things from vendors, and they get some special skills that allow them to temporarily increase attributes for themselves and their allies. Elves are elegant and long-lived creatures, with memory being a keystone of their culture, going as far as being able to absorb memories by consuming the flesh of others. In fact, in Original Sin 2, this is actually represented by an in-game mechanic called Corpse Eater. And when you eat a body part as an elf, many times you will get access to the memory of the dead, learning a bit about who they were and how they died. And sometimes you may even learn new spells. I think this mechanic is pretty much a guarantee to be in Divinity, so if you want to play as an elf, be prepared to have some cannibalism in your veins. Elves also get a Lore Master boost in DOS 2, and they even have an elven skill called Flesh Sacrifice, which allows them to basically lower their health for a damage and action point boost. Dwarves are a clan-based, proud race that can be fiercely nationalistic to their empress, and in Original Sin 2 they get bonuses to max vitality and dodging, they get a bonus to sneaking, and they get a special dwarven skill that allows them to turn targets to stone. And lizards are a race that in Original Sin 2 mostly hail from the Ancient Empire, which is a desert oasis type biome. And they tend to be cultured aristocrats, followers of the rules of law, and many times they see outsiders as servants, which is why many outsiders look at lizard society as elitist. Lizards in Original Sin 2 gain extra fire and poison resistance, they gain a boost to persuasion, and they have a lizard skill that allows them to breathe flames in a cone.
The lizard looks you up and down, like a farmer would a fetching horse.
So now that those 4 more obvious races are out of the way, what else do we see in the trailer? There's one more race that I spotted, and that is orcs, or half-orcs? Hard to know for sure, but do note that as far as I'm aware, half-orcs have never been mentioned in Rivellon lore before. There's actually only one half-race character in the lore in general, and that is the beautiful Malady, who is half-elf, half-demon. With Divinity though, Larian has plenty of opportunities to add a ton to the lore here, especially considering that this game will be about 100 years or so after Original Sin 2. And it's also possible that Larian may just be humanizing orcs' appearance a bit, as they did look pretty crazy in Original Sin, but then again, if you look closely in the trailer, you can spot a few more orky orc looking characters like this guy. I'm going to make the assumption that this trailer is meant to hint to us that some type of orc will be a playable race, which is certainly interesting to think about, as in previous games they were either vilified or not really mentioned at all. The orcs in this trailer seem to be assimilating a bit more than orcs typically would in the lore with the other sentient races, but then again, this whole trailer is just a bunch of degenerates, so perhaps orcs in a general sense are still going to be a bit more wild and barbarous. So that brings our race speculation list to humans, elves, dwarves, and lizards, 4 races that I'm like 90% sure will be playable races, but also orcs, which I'd say I'm currently at 70 to 80% sure that'll be a playable race, as why did they show them in the trailer and then comment that on the Reddit AMA? But there is another race that may be in this trailer, we just don't realize it, and that is the undead race. Undead were actually a playable race in Original Sin 2, but in that time period, undead are a bit feared and misunderstood, and therefore they tend to try to hide the fact that they are undead, sometimes even using the faces of deceased persons. It is possible that there could be some undead in this trailer and we just don't have the eyes to spot it, no pun intended. Undead in Original Sin 2 are described as being considered abominations in Rivellon and an affront to the natural order whose mere presence invites violence. They are unique in that poison actually heals them in Original Sin 2, while regular healing damages them, making them an interesting addition to a party as you have to switch up your strat a bit when it comes to healing. They also get a special race ability that lets them play dead. So I'm leaning towards undead being a playable race in Divinity, but I'd say I'm a little less certain when compared to the previously mentioned races. We're not done just yet though. In Rivellon lore, imps are represented as one of the main sentient races, as they were created by one of the 7 eternal gods, or so some of the lore says. Although not a playable race in the Divinity franchise, and I don't think you even see imps in Original Sin 2, if Larian was looking to offer something a bit more unique than the other races, imp would certainly be a really interesting, cool, fun, great addition that could also make sense lore-wise. Imps are of course tiny creatures and they're blessed with intelligence and magic, and I'll get more into the lore in future videos, but as of now I'd say I'm about 50-50 with imps being a playable race. Now I want to bring up 3 more races, but for these 3 I am the least confident in them being playable races, and let's start off with the Eternals. The Eternals were a precursor race of the 7 sentient races of Rivellon. They were a race so diverse that they didn't really fit the modern understanding of what a race is. Bane in Original Sin 2 was of course undead, but he was also an Eternal. Now it is possible that Larian could do something with the Eternal race depending on where they go with the lore, as in Eternal history the vast majority of Eternals were cast out into the void, including the God King, where many of them became these weird alien creatures of the void, while 8 other Eternals became quote-unquote gods, and 7 of these 8 gods created new races. 6 for Rivellon, and then there's another race that we'll talk about shortly that is not native to Rivellon, but certainly wouldn't mind taking it over. I'm not at all convinced yet that the Eternals will be a playable race, but they will most certainly be referenced, and I would assume that we would encounter at least a few of them, perhaps even Fane. Now some of you may be wondering about that other race that wouldn't mind taking over Rivellon. Well, the Eternal who created this race was banished by the other Eternal gods to the plane of Tartarus. And he was banished because he created an abominable race known as the Demons. If Larian is looking to lean really hard into offering more evil-based content, having demons as a playable race, or perhaps even just a demon companion, would be super interesting, maybe even half demon. Although demons are mostly confined to the plane of Tartarus, which is basically hell, they can still be summoned into Rivellon, or, I mean, if you just look at the trailer, they may just be flooding in by the dozens. Some sort of gate appears to be opening here with the Hellstone. And the last of the 3 races here are the Renar or Renari, a race that is represented in Larian's Beyond Divinity game, but hardly at all in the original Sin games. The Renari are native to the plane of Nemesis and are known to be great rift runners, so creating doorways between different places or worlds. Some lore describes them as tall humanoids with digitigrade legs, blue skin, short tails, and 3 fingers. They're represented as, I think, mostly morally good in Beyond Divinity, but so much is unknown about these guys it's hard to even really talk about them. But they would make for a super interesting playable race though, or perhaps even just a companion. So those are the races that kind of fall into that more sentient type category that would make sense to possibly be playable races. Of course, the races I talked about at first are much more likely to actually be playable races in the game, but what are you guys thinking about playing? What are you hoping is actually a playable race in Divinity? Let's talk about some classes and build stuff now. Well, the biggest question here is what type of class build system is Larian going to go with? So in Baldur's Gate 3, you had set classes. You would choose the wizard. You would choose the rogue, and as you level up, you would get rogue options and features given to you. Some automatically, some you would choose. You could, of course, multi-class into other classes, but for the most part, it is a fairly guided experience when it comes to the general category of the class that you chose. You are a rogue, and everything that you choose is rogue unless you multi-class. In Divinity Original Sin 2 and Original Sin, the first game, it is much different. There are no set classes, despite being able to choose a preset class and character creation. That preset class, though, is just a level 1 preset to get you started in a direction that may represent that type of class that you traditionally play. But when you level up in Original Sin and Original Sin 2, you put points into different combat abilities, they are called. And in this case, we're talking about skills specifically, and putting points into skills allows you to learn skills from skill books of that skill category. And the most common way to obtain skill books is by buying them from vendors, so very different from most other RPGs. These skills in some ways do represent different classes. For example, if I invest mainly into huntsman and use a bow, I would kind of fall into that traditional ranger type class if I used mostly only huntsman skills. But it's completely up to me how I want to spend my skill points when I level up. There's no pop-up, you leveled up, here's your ranger's next level skills menu. The progression system is not guided really at all, and it's common for beginners to even spend points in skills and not even realize for a while that they then have to go obtain skill books associated with the skills that they've invested points into. To give you guys a quick example here, if you take a look at my Thane character right now, he kind of looks like a character from Grounded, but if we go into my character menu sheet here, you'll notice that I have points in a bunch of different skills here. Now I of course have the most points into Hydro, because Hydro is water spells, but water spells tend to associate with a lot of healing spells, so he's my party's healer right now. But I also have points in Necromancer, I have some in Geo from the gear I'm wearing, I have points into Huntsman, there's some into Warfare. If you take a look at my skill bar right here, you'll notice I have an arrow skill right here. Even though I don't do a lot of arrow magic, having Tornado is a really good skill just to have to clear up some surfaces and also some, fog or smoke in the air. Then next to that, I have Blood Rain, which is a necro skill. I have another necro skill called Mosquito Swarm. Then I have a healing ritual spell, which is of course a Hydro, and then a bunch of different huntsman ranger type skills here as I use a bow as my primary weapon when I don't actually have to heal. So very varied build here. Even though I'm focused on healing, I can do so much more, and I'm still focused, but I'm also other classes as well, so it's hard to really pinpoint what I'm actually playing here. Then I have my tank type character who I choose to use a sword and shield with, and Losa is mostly spec'd into summoning actually, so she's a summoner tank, and these are some interesting combinations that you don't see often in other games. And then Red Prince right here is my two-handed warrior, and he does a lot of polymorph type skills, changing opponents into animals or spawning wings on my character. But I'm also really primarily a two-handed damage dealer, and I have a bunch of great two-handed attacks such as Onslaught right here. Absolutely destroys the opponent that takes the damage from that. Now, what type of system will Larian go with for the upcoming Divinity? My guess is as good as yours. However, I am leaning towards perhaps a hybrid system that mixes Baldur's Gate 3's focused class. You really have a class identity in that game, alongside Original Sin 1 and 2's more freedom-based skill type system, leaning a little bit more towards it being more like the Original Sin games than Baldur's Gate 3, but I think maybe they'll find a way to have a hybrid in there. So players that want a little bit more of a guided experience can have it and feel like they are a class without having to invent their own class. But then players who want that freedom, that build freedom, can really also go off the rails and do some crazy, unique, interesting stuff. Now that's all speculation, of course, but I'm glad to inform any of you guys that haven't played the Original Sin games kind of how it works. Original Sin, the first game, works a little differently than the second game, but the second game expands on the first game. One thing we can talk about to end the video here that isn't as speculation based is what type of build builds will exist in Divinity, because it's almost certain that the type of builds that you can do in Original Sin 2 will exist in the upcoming Divinity. This is Rivellon lore. This is the type of magic that exists, the type of characters in the lore that play certain roles with their builds. This is all cemented into Rivellon lore, and I'm assuming it will show up in Divinity as well. It just might be a different type of system and represented in a different way. But let me tell you guys about the types of builds that you can do, so you can kind of start planning ahead what type of character you might want to play, as these types of spells and skills are pretty much guaranteed to be in the game in some way, shape, or form. So up first, we have your arrow skills and spells. Spells such as summoning a tornado to clear up the ground of fire or to clear out smoke. We have lightning spells that fall under arrow, such as chain lightning. And then we have the famous teleport spell, which is actually an arrow spell. And teleport is such a staple spell of Divinity Original Sin 2 that I feel like it's going to have to show up in the next Divinity game. And teleport lets you teleport enemies or allies all across the battlefield, sometimes to their deaths or sometimes to a safer position. Geomancer skills are very earth and poison based, so if you're a big poison type player, I'd say it's pretty much a guarantee that there will be ways to do poison builds at the very least. And some examples of geo spells include Fortify, which is a support spell that armors up your character along with a few other benefits. You have spells like Fossil Strike that let you throw big balls of earth that create oil surfaces and slow down opponents. Then there's poison spells like Contamination or Poison Wave, AoE poison spells. Huntsman represents skills and spells that are very ranger-like. You have First Aid, which is of course a heal, ricochet type arrows, more powerful skills such as arrow spray that hit multiple opponents. The list goes on. The Hydro skill in Original Sin 2 represents water and ice spells and skills, but like I mentioned earlier, some of the best healing spells in the game are water-based, such as Restoration or Healing Ritual. But then you also have the Rain spell to put out fire or to wet your opponents, to then maybe combine with some of the arrow lightning spells. Or perhaps you want to get icy with spells such as Ice Blast, which is like a conal chill type spell. And then of course there's going to be spells that rain down hail from the sky, etc. Necromancy is a thing in Rivellon lore. Many of you guys will be happy to hear that. And these types of spells and skills can involve blood, such as raining blood from the sky. You have spells like Mosquito Swarm, which actually is an HP siphon skill that gives you a heal at the expense of enemy vitality. The mosquitoes go out there, pull the blood from the opponent, and basically give it back to you. But then you also have other necromancer type spells, such as raising undead spiders or spells that explode corpses, etc. Polymorph is a really fun skill category in Original Sin 2, as it lets you change yourself or your opponents into all sorts of different creatures, or spawn extra body parts such as Tentacle Lash, which you spawn a tentacle and can do this, this melee type attack that's really powerful that has more range than your sword would. My favorite poly spell and one of the most useful spells is turning opponents into chickens for a couple rounds of combat. And then there's another one that spawns wings on your character so you can fly around, and many more. Pyro should be pretty self-explanatory, but fire spells I'd say are a guarantee in the next Divinity game. I know a lot of you guys are probably fire mage type players in RPGs, so worry not. Now I don't have a ton to show you on these characters that I'm loaded in on here, but your typical fireball spell, of course, should exist in Divinity. You have laser ray type spells and some mobility skills that cause fire eruptions where you land, more powerful spells like meteor strikes, etc. Scoundrel skills represent what many would think of as sneaky dagger backstabbing rogue type skills. Many of them actually require a dagger in Original Sin 2. We have mobility skills such as cloak and dagger, which is basically a self teleport. We have backstabs, all sorts of crazy damage stabby type skills, or some invisibility cloaking type skills. And a lot of players actually like to spec into Scoundrel in Original Sin 2, even if it's not really their focus at all, because there's a skill in the Scoundrel category called Adrenaline, which gives you extra action points in a round if you need them. It does cost you action points in the following round, but it can be a really good way to get extra to finish off an opponent and not have to wait until the next round. Summoning is super powerful and it does exist in Rivellon lore, so summoners, I don't think you have to worry about it not being in the next Divinity game. It's very popular. Now, there are some summoning spells in the other skill categories as well, but summoning itself was where you can really focus on summoning, have a real focus on it, and you can use skills such as summoning gigantic incarnate or summoning totems all over the battlefield, and then having all sorts of spells to support your summons, such as making them deal 100% extra damage at the cost of them being unsummoned after that attack, spells that add ranged attacks to your summons that by default might not have a ranged attack. The list goes on. And last but not least are the warfare skills, which for the most part represent fighter type skills. So, you have a bunch of knockdown skills such as Battle Stomp, Battering Ram, you have AoE whirlwind attacks, crit boost spells, super powerful, skills like Onslaught, which I showed you earlier, that just deal a crap ton of damage. So that's the type of magic and builds that exist in Rivellon lore. And some of the other Divinity games like Divine Divinity or Ego Draconis, you do actually choose a class, and it's your cliche type classes, mage, ranger, I don't know if it's warrior or fighter, but stuff like that. So hopefully you can kind of start thinking about what type of character you want to play as, but we're gonna have to wait, of course, to see what type of system they go with, if there's gonna actually be concrete classes, or if they invent like a new skill system. But that's the type of stuff that I'm sure we are going to experience in some way, shape, or form in the upcoming Divinity game. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Lots more Divinity content to come, even if we don't get an update anytime soon. I just love speculating on this game and talking about things. I will have an entire lore series on everything Divinity. Before Divinity officially launches, of course, it's going to be a high quality series, and I'm gearing up for that Let's Play when the game finally drops, that lore focused Let's Play series. It was a great success for me with Baldur's Gate 3, and I want nothing more than to do it again with Divinity. So thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.